Hi, so I want to talk about the Glasgow Climate Conference. There's a few things to say about that for sure, but before I get into that, I just want to touch on two other news stories in recent days. One of them, in fact, was breaking news today. Just briefly, because I'll probably not make an individual video on those. So firstly, this breaking news today that there was some sort of incident outside the Liverpool Women's Hospital. Now, um, I'm a bit cautious to say it was an attempted terrorist attack because the location is unusual. I mean, it's a hospital, not usually the location of a terrorist attack. But it appears that this vehicle blew up. Some reports were saying a man was seen operating some sort of device, but it's like any sort of incident like this, information is scattered. So we know that one person is dead and at least one other person is injured. Um, whether the person who is dead was involved in this, let's say, attack, or whether they were a passerby, I don't know. Clearly, there's going to be investigations ongoing, but I'd call it a serious incident. I would say this though, if it was an attempted bombing, like a car bomb, it mustn't have been very strong. One vehicle was on fire, some other vehicles were slightly damaged, but no windows were blown in. So if it was a car bomb, it either malfunctioned or it wasn't a very large scale one. Because usually a car bomb would cause a lot more damage than that. Windows would blown in, it would just be a lot more powerful. So it kind of reminds me of the Glasgow airport attack of 2007, which was kind of botched by the attackers. But, it's too early to say. I really, really hope, and this is absolutely speculation on my part, zero evidence for this, but one does wonder about the location, the Liverpool Women's Hospital. Now, was this something akin to the Plymouth mass shooting earlier this year? Some sort of misogynistic thing? Apparently, three men have been arrested. I hope not. I really, really hope not. But it might just be a coincidence because it's a public building. Who knows? But obviously a serious incident. I'll be interested to see what emerges from that. The other thing I wanted to touch on was the passing of F.W. de Klerk. F.W. de Klerk was 85. He was a former president of South Africa and the last president, in fact, from the apartheid era, serving, I understand, from 1989 to 1994. Now, I've always found de Klerk an interesting character. He was unquestionably part of the apartheid system, and he wasn't just a casual observer. He was part of that system. He was complicit in some of its abuses, but he was very much a transformative figure. And I think it is right that he jointly won the Nobel Peace Prize with Mandela in 1994, because what he done as an individual, the transformative process. Some would say it was opportunism, but I think de Klerk was a very interesting man. I would call him the Gorbachev of South Africa, in the sense that Mikhail Gorbachev was part of the communist system, but he knew it had to change. F.W. de Klerk was part of the apartheid system, but he knew it had to change. Um, and he will probably always be somewhat controversial figure, but he made his mark on history. He made his mark on South Africa, and now he's passed away. I imagine a lot of people will miss him. I think he and Mandela had a sort of grudging respect. Probably were never great friends, but well, I say that, but I was looking at an interview with de Klerk on Al Jazeera last night, and I imagine this is from a few years ago, and he was saying that actually he and Mandela did often get together for dinners and so on. So clearly, if they weren't great friends, they at least found a sort of mutual respect, and that's it's an interesting story. Okay, so the Glasgow Climate Summit. I resisted talking about this until the end for obvious reasons because I felt talking about it before that it would just be there'd still be development negotiations and so on. I didn't actually realize that this sort of summit is actually quite regular. It happens every year, but It's just that certain summits seem to get more attention than others. The ones that I remember is COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009. Um, the COP, I guess now it would be 20 in Paris, 2015, and Glasgow. How much of an impact Glasgow's having around the world in terms of this summit, I don't know. But it's something that happens actually quite often. It's just that each stage is like a stepping stone. Now, let me just put my cards on the table. There are some on the right of politics, some conservatives, who believe that the whole climate thing, and I know Nigel Farage is one of them, it's just a huge exaggeration and it's like a fad. It's a sort of progressive political issue. It's kind of it's something that's massively exaggerated. I do not agree with that. I think there are some very pressing issues. You cannot say it is a normal situation to have 49 degrees in British Columbia. That's not a normal situation. It's not necessarily that disasters are more deadly than before, because if you look at the 1970s, there were natural disasters then that are just as deadly as anything now, and in some cases even worse. For example, in the year 1970, the Ebola cyclone in Bangladesh, Lebanese, Pakistan, killed upwards of 500,000 people. And throughout the 70s, I'm just using the 70s as an example, but we could say the 80s, previous decades, there were some very deadly weather events. Um, what's happening now is that storms are not necessarily deadlier, but they do seem to be happening more frequently. I don't agree with the dystopianism of some climate activists. For example, I do not believe that billions of people are going to die in the next 5 years. I think that's irresponsible. I think it's false. I think it is hyperbole. And I think it's kind of like the millennial cults of the 17th century. It's the end of the world. So I don't agree with that. I also think it's not practical to ignore all the developments that have been made and all the progress that has been made. Um, it's all very well for Extinction Rebellion and certain Swedish activists who I won't name to to come out with such cynicism and such scorn and such pessimism, but that's all they ever do. I honestly think, that school of thought will never be happy. I believe that they will never be happy, no matter what progress is made. But let's look at the situation in Glasgow. Alok Sharma, the president of this conference, was quite emotional at one point, and he said that was a combination of factors. Today, he had a joint press conference with the Prime Minister, um, and Johnson was asked, he was put on the spot, what would you give this out of 10 in terms of progress? And, obviously he gave a politician's answer. He didn't want to answer that, but above 6. How about that? Above 6. So they were cautiously optimistic about the outcome. One thing that is historic is this issue about reducing coal dependency has never been agreed before, but it was watered down at the last minute by India and China. So rather than phasing out coal completely, it's about reducing it. Um, I understand the disappointment, but at the same time, these are rapidly developing economies, and if you look at the period of the Industrial Revolution to now, what is essentially the case is asking India and China to change at a much faster pace. Now, India and China, like Alok Sharma said, they will have to answer to the poorest countries. They will have to answer to those Pacific Island nations that are really feeling the brunt of rising sea levels and so on. China, especially with its Belt and Road Initiative, is going to have to, up its propaganda on what it is doing on this issue. Earlier, the Modi government announced that 2070 would be their target, and a lot of people said 2070. It's 59 years from now. It's far too long. But I think you have to look at things in context, and actually, in terms of a developing economy, in terms of the sort of rate that India is growing at, and the sort of situation it's in, that's actually quite an impressive target. Incredible as that sounds. One issue I take with India, in particular, is they complain that they don't get money from developed countries, and this all takes money and give us the support that we need. Well, India has its own space program. This is a big issue I take with India. When it comes to issues like foreign aid, they say that's necessary for X, Y, and Z. And, especially from a British position, and any time we disagree with India on something, they can just throw the empire at us. It is an issue I take with India, particularly this nationalist Hindutva reactionary attitude to any outside criticism, especially if it's coming from the UK. Oh, but the British colonized us, they want to bring that up with everything. But this is something that is about the world today. I take the view that a country that can afford its own space program should be doing a lot more in terms of prioritizing problems it's got down on Earth. I mean, it's all about nationalism. It's all about, look how strong a nation we are. We've got our own rockets. But I think I do question some of India's priorities. Having said that, you know, it's not an easy country to govern. Almost 1.4 billion people, um, incredibly diverse in terms of religion and so on, and in terms of the makeup of society, in terms of the challenges they face in a whole range of different areas. So it's not an easy country to govern. But I think India can't have it both ways. It can't say, "Oh, well, developed countries are not giving us the support we need." Oh, but by the way, don't lecture us when we have our own space program. I've got a problem with that, and I think that it should be brought up with the Indians. You've got your own space program, so why can't you look at dealing with some priorities at home, such as poverty, a lot more? Um, as for China, well, this is an issue, that's definitely an area where the West can probably work with China on. I saw an interview on the BBC, young activist Hui Yu, and I think that's a pseudonym she uses as opposed to her own name, but she started off school protesting Guilin, in the south of China, and she had the sort of idealism of a lot of young activists. Incidentally, she's also supportive of Insulate Britain. I don't know if she's living here. I believe she got a fine in Switzerland. I've just Googled her. Um, this is the thing, young people are very, very idealistic. I say young people. I'm only 36. I'm not exactly an old man. But I do remember being a university student. You think you can change the world. You're idealistic and you're very, very dogmatic. Um, and I think it's all very well to be passionate about something, but you also have to be realistic and you have to accept that, for example, on the issue of protest, it's not just only your voice counts. There are also other people who, for example, don't want to be caught up in an Insulate Britain protest. So I think that there's far too much pandering to young people who think they can do as they please. But that doesn't mean that I'm disregarding this. I mean, clearly, in her case, you have to respect it on some level because she's in a system where it's dangerous to stand up to the government. So I do respect that. But if she's come to Britain and she's now joining the likes of Insulate Britain, that's kind of I don't know what her legal status is, if she's got asylum status or what. One can presume that either way. But if that's the case, I would say it's a bit ungrateful to come to a country then break its laws. In that sense, these people are young, but they're still technically young adults. And part of being an adult is having responsibility, which means not breaking the law, which means respecting the rest of society. Um, but that doesn't mean that I downplay or disregard the passion that they have and the sincerity of that passion. Um, because I think the issues are real. I think that they are very real. I just don't agree with the dystopian approach that some climate groups take. And I also think they're forgetting that world leaders have 100 things to balance, not least, economies, a whole range of other issues, healthcare, particularly coming out of a pandemic, transport. That's a big one. Education. There's a whole range of issues. I mean, I would say that people wanting to scorn at Glasgow at least consider that Alex Sharma has worked his this guy's had 6 hours sleep if his account's to be accepted in 3 days. He's been working absolutely flat out to try and get these some agreements. I don't think there'll be any single conference where absolutely everything can be solved, but each time it gets slightly better. So before Paris, as the Prime Minister said, the world was looking at a rise of 4 degrees. Now that's down to 2 degrees, which is still too high. But I think actually I'm quite optimistic because I think there is so much being debated, there's so much activism going on, and people might say, oh, wait, you've just been criticizing the activists. Well, activism takes many forms, and I don't accept that only by gluing yourself to a road can you protest climate issues. I think there's responsible activists as well. I mean, there's young people, for example, from the Pacific Islands who are very passionate. There's a whole range of activism going on. It isn't just the loudest that are the most right, or who use the most shocking tactics are the most right. I think that notion has to be pushed back against. Um, but I'm optimistic in the sense that I think there is genuinely arisen a public consciousness that didn't exist before. People are broadly speaking, more ethical on green issues. People do want to see a reduction in waste. I think there's a lot more can be done. I think plastic waste remains a major issue, and I'm guilty. I waste plastic. I try not to. I reuse bags. The plastic bags that I have, I use as bin liners, so I'm kind of using them again, but ultimately that still gets put into probably a landfill. Um, I would like to see a massive reduction in plastic. McDonald's toys. Um, Someone told me recently actually they're starting to recycle them, so that's good. But I think there's a lot more can be done. You look at food packaging, some extra packaging there that's not needed, plastic. Um, I think that's one area that could definitely be looked at, cleaning up the world's oceans. I mean, when you think about it, there is so much to do. But I also believe that public consciousness has risen. I believe there's great innovators out there. And I do not believe that human society, we're all just going to die in a few years. I don't think it's that bad. I think it's a very pressing critical issue. But I also think that a lot of good is being done. And I do wish that the climate doom mongers would look at some of that progress and actually welcome it. If they genuinely want to see progress, then why not welcome things that have happened? Um, But I think Alok Sharma was right. India and China will have to answer to, the countries most vulnerable to this, including India and China and themselves. But they're powerful countries. Um, contrast that to someone like Tuvalu, um, or the Maldives. They really don't have the sort of weight to make an influence. China and India do. Anyway, I'll round this up. The big thing, by the way, that did come out of this is the fact that this reduction in coal. It's not ideal. It's not totally phasing out, but it's better than nothing. But like I said, I really think there are certain climate activists will never be pleased. No matter what progress is done, they will never be pleased. But personally, I'm concerned, but not so concerned that I'm losing sleep because I think that actually there is enough activism going on. There is enough political willpower. Well, maybe not, but I think the trajectory is in the right direction. I think that pressure on governments is enough now. I think that we're in a situation where the issue is no longer ignored, right? So I don't think people can honestly say when Greta Thunberg, I tried to get through this video without mentioning her, but when Greta Thunberg came out and said, "Oh, all it is blah blah blah," what's she doing other than berating leaders? Alok Sharma was working flat out, so were other delegates there, and for her to just come out with such cynicism, um, that's not productive at all. And I'm a little bit tired of the media placating her and not putting her on the spot and saying, "Well, wait a second, don't you welcome this? Isn't this a good thing?" Um, because this constant cynicism on any issue, incidentally. I mean, to cite something I care about, crime and justice. I am very skeptical, and I often berate the legal system fiercely because I do believe it is very out of touch. But that doesn't mean that I say the entire thing is absolutely terrible. It doesn't mean that I don't welcome positive decisions when they happen. You have to do that. If you look at any issue and it's just 100% negative, um, it won't lead to anything positive. So that's what I would say about climate activism. They're far, far too dystopian. How about actually working with governments instead of always protesting, instead of always saying, "Oh, you're all terrible"? Why don't you work with governments to get the progress that you want? That would be a lot more practical than just throwing stones, metaphorically speaking, which is what they do. Right, I'll round this up. Let me know your thoughts. If you live in Glasgow or that part of Scotland, what's it been like? Has there been a lot of security? I imagine it's been a big thing because, I think it's the biggest event Scotland's ever hosted. So I imagine there was a big police presence there. But I believe the world is in the right trajectory. Probably there's a lot more to do, but as the Prime Minister said, before Paris, the world was looking at a 4-degree rise. It's now 2 degrees. Still too high, but I think the trajectory is in the right path.